You'll excuse me for just a moment. Let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thanks so much for this day. We pray that you'll guide us during this very troubled world, that we will be able to grasp and understand and prepare for the things that are coming upon the world. Pray that you'll not give us a spirit of fear, but one of power, and guide us through your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, if you'll excuse me for 1 second, somebody redid the password at the church on the Wi-Fi, which I need to get to. Okay, now I'm not getting the right password. I have some things I need to get on my iPad, and I need internet access to get them, and I cannot do that without the internet. So give me 1 second here. Okay. There you go. Thanks. Okay, so world in peril. I've been doing a lot of extra interviews and updates and talking to people, and I will confess to you that I'm a bit on the tired side, that these things continue to sort of spin out of control, and it is a difficult world that we live in. It is definitely a world in peril. There are any number of directions to go. So here, just by way of intro, here's some places that you can get us. I suspect that eventually YouTube may go away because we will, YouTube will go away. So, oh, that's okay. You broke my iPad. I apologize. Eventually, I think YouTube will go away. They're getting more and more difficult to talk about the things that we really that we think we need to talk about. We talk about the convergence of events, about how quickly things are happening. And again, this is just sort of the grid that I go through, looking forward to this day when we'll all have better understanding about how these things are going to come together. So let me just talk about a few things that are going on. It's a very turbulent world, as you may have noticed. This is from this morning's London Times, or yesterday's London Times. Have you noticed that it seems like there's leadership changes going on in all these different countries around the world? Liz Truss became the Prime Minister of the UK about 5 weeks ago. 2 days before Queen Elizabeth died, she had said that Liz Truss could form a government. Then the Queen died. There was a 10-day mourning period for the country. Liz Truss has assumed office, and literally less than 4 weeks after that, everything is in turmoil. She had a finance minister. That guy got sacked this week. And things are in a very difficult state. We see things that are happening. There's a complete corruption in our education system. Here's an example. This is I think one of the deans at the University of Minnesota School of Medicine talking to graduates at their graduation, and this is what he said.
With gratitude, we, the students of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Medical School class of 2026, stand here today among our friends, families, peers, mentors, and communities who have supported us in reaching this milestone. Our institution is located on Dakota land. Today, many Indigenous people throughout the state, including Dakota and Ojibwe, call the Twin Cities home. We also recognize this acknowledgement is not enough. We commit to uprooting the legacy and perpetuation of structural violence deeply embedded within the healthcare system. We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression. As we enter this profession with opportunity for growth, we commit to promoting a culture of anti-racism, listening and amplifying voices for positive change. We pledge to honor all Indigenous ways of healing that have been historically marginalized by Western medicine. Knowing that health is intimately connected to our environment, we commit to healing our planet and communities. We vow to embrace our role as community members and strive to embody cultural humility. We promise to continue restoring trust in the medical system and fulfilling our responsibilities as educators and advocates. We commit to collaborating with social, political, and additional systems to advance health equity. We will learn from the scientific innovations made before us and pledge to advance and share this knowledge with peers and neighbors. We recognize the importance of being in community with and advocating for those we serve.
So we're going to fight white supremacy, colonialism, and the gender binary while we have this on, I don't know if he said Lakota or Dakota land. By the way, that tribe took it from other tribes. What about them, huh? Where's your cultural sensitivity, doctor? This is just troubling. So here's just a piece of practical advice. If you go to the doctor, look at the diploma on the wall, and if it's from the University of Minnesota School of Medicine, Twin Cities, cancel your appointment and leave. Because they don't care about science. And he talks about cultural humility, what they want to do with all of this transgender stuff that they're pushing everywhere. It's unbelievable. I think I mentioned that down at Hilliard schools, they had a QR code on the teacher badges that would take you to a sex ed website, sexual education website put up by the National Education Association. I would read for you the things that are on that website, but I would never do another thing at this church again because they're so explicit. I could play you clips of mothers reading from books that were in teachers' libraries in many school districts across the country. I think the one I saw this week was Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. And I heard her read from the book. I can't play the clip of that in a church. Talking about sexual relations between men. And this is a book for kids. It's really unbelievable. I don't know if I have it. I might have accidentally deleted it. Oh well. I have a clip from the UK London Times paper this morning about a teacher. The teacher was given instructions at the beginning of the year that and I can never remember which way it is, so if I have it backwards, you can just reverse it and get the correct story. A little boy in her class was to be referred to by a girl's name, per the parents' instructions. 8 years old. 8 years old. Do you know that there's legislation introduced in Virginia that if you do not accept your child's gender expression, they want the state to be able to come and take the child away from you? That's in Virginia. Now, that's pending legislation. I could go on and on. In California, Governor Newsom recently signed a piece of legislation, I think it was AB 107, that says we will be a sanctuary state for any child that wants to change gender. And in connection with that, they issue these statements like, we stand firmly opposed to conversion therapy. Okay, conversion therapy. So, which they mean is, if you want to somebody comes to you and says, I don't really want to be homosexual. And so you counsel them to not be homosexual. That's conversion therapy, because your sexual preference is fixed at birth and can never, ever be changed. And we just know that this is just simply not true. But it is not conversion therapy to convert a physical boy to a fake girl. That's not conversion therapy. The whole thing is, these people are insane lunatics. And listen, this is an expression of Romans chapter 1. God gave them over to a reprobate mind. And the meaning of that is that they lose the ability to reason. And it's a continuum, it's a downward progression. And eventually they get to the point where they don't make any sense. Governor Newsom has paid for billboards in states where they are enacting abortion restrictions, like Texas, Ohio, other states. And in that it says, come to California, we will protect your rights, or we'll respect your choice. And then it quotes a verse from the Bible. Love your neighbor as yourself. But they start in the middle of what Jesus was talking about, because he said, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the second one doesn't work without the first one. And what they're doing goes clearly against the commandments of God. But that's Governor Newsom. The last evaluation I saw that they were ranking the Democrats and how well they might do to run for president in 2024. By the way, we have elections coming up. Some people are optimistic that Republicans will do well. I'm sort of the opinion, I'll believe it when I see it. It could be historic. It could be a wipeout of the Democratic Party in the Senate and the House. So we get the Republican lunatics instead of just the Democratic lunatics. But I want to caution people that even if that happens, those people will take office in early January. And when they take office, it will be a little over 2 years and 2 weeks that the executive branch will not change. And that's troubling. Talk about that in a moment. And I haven't talked as much about the apostasy in the church and the falling away and the twisting of Scripture as I used to. But every now and then, an example comes up that is so egregious that it's hard to overlook. So this is Allendale United Methodist Church. I believe it's in Florida. And this is Woke Preacher Clips, Woke Preacher TV, if you want to follow them on Twitter. And here's what the tweet says. This is a picture I took from the morning worship service 2 weeks ago at this church. This is the Sunday, they call it Sunday worship service. And it says here, at the beginning of the church, Allendale United Methodist Church is a reconciling congregation. We affirm the sacred worth of all people and strive to practice Christ's example of unconditional love without exclusion. So this guy is woke. He's so woke, he's totally asleep to what God has said. Look at here's a clip, it'll start playing in just a second, the sound, of what happened 2 weeks ago in the church service. He had this guy.
We have a special guest. Did y'all hear? Miss Pentecost is here.
Pentecost, a drag queen.
You can hear me just about everywhere I go. I'm quite loud.
Let me make sure this is on. Yep, you're good.
Yep, yeah.
Right.
Maybe you can't hear me everywhere I go.
Well, Miss Pentecost, I had some questions that I thought, we could have a little conversation. Is that all right?
I might have some answers for you.
Why are the kids
I
wearing a
was
mask?
thinking of maybe some questions y'all might have.
Guess they
You
don't
might
wanna
have
be
some questions
identified.
you want to ask, and maybe some of the adults had some questions too. Yeah, maybe she'll let you borrow it when you're
woke up
older,
like
when you're
this.
allowed to wear
I just-
makeup. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, one of the things I think is great about Miss Pentecost is she reminds us that we follow a God who calls us to not conform to things of this world, that we're supposed to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. And that means that what I think today may have to change tomorrow if I continue to renew my mind. And it's so cool that we serve a God that calls us to continue to grow and continue to change into something new, and to not be bound by the ways that the world confines us sometimes, that we're supposed to live differently. So I'm so thankful that you're here with us.
As am I.
Yeah, all right, let's pray.
That's blasphemous. I mean, that clearly is blasphemy. And so he's quoting from Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 about be not conformed. And he says, well, we shouldn't be conformed to the things of this world, but what does he do then is he is conforming to the things of this world. Completely upside down and backwards. In Canada, by the way, this is from the National Post the other day. Remember the truckers' protest that they had, and they went in and they seized bank accounts of people that had contributed to the truckers? Well, now they're having hearings, and they're talking about, was there actually a threat to national security? Or was this just people overstepping their bounds? Now, there is some good, I guess, that comes out of some of these things, is it becomes clear that there are people that are overstepping their bounds, but the thing is, they're still in power. It's just like, I mean, we can sit here and we can complain about all these things that are happening with regard to politics in our country, the way the executive branch is overreaching, the things that they do. I'll show you an example in just a second. But like I said, they're going to be in power for another couple of years. And I think the only way, and so let's say we get a Republican House, a Republican Senate, they pass legislation to defund certain branches of government that have overreached. The president could veto it. And unless there's a veto-proof majority in the House where the legislation came up, it's not going to go into effect. If the Congress starts enacting things and they override vetoes, what do you think the president is going to do? He's going to come in and he's going to issue all of these executive orders. I hope if there's a change in the presidency in a couple of years, assuming there are, it's pretty far out that there are elections then. I hope somebody's keeping track of all the junk that they've done to come in and overdo it within a couple of days. It's hard to be optimistic about it because it's gone so far. Now, the other story here is well, this is not the right, it's this one. So here is a story also in the National Post. Quebec doctors suggest maid for infants. Now, that's not a maid that is like you have to come help clean up around the house. MAID stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. And so this Quebec doctor goes to where they're having hearings on this, and he essentially says, we want to apply MAID, medical assistance in dying, to children that have deformities. And we will make the decision. There will be a committee, of course, And if it's something very bad, I guess we'll just decide that it's not worth this person living. And there's a big push in Canada and other Western countries to push medical assistance in dying, euthanasia. I saw an article this week about a young girl in Europe who was just unhappy with life, and so they helped her end it. And so what you have is these people are playing God with no principles behind them. I'm not a big fan of making associations to Germany in 1930. I think it's overused too much, but I think it really applies in this case. Mengele would be extremely happy with what the West has voluntarily done. This is coming through our medical institutions. These people are trained doctors. I hear from a lot of doctors. They write to me and they say, I am very concerned about the way that this is going. Made for infants. Here's another. It's really unbelievable. I don't have slides on this, but about a week ago, there was a guy who was selected to become the head of a football club in Australia. He was hired. I believe his salary was going to be 850,000 Australian dollars. I think he was in the Melbourne area. It was then found after he was hired that in 2015, he'd become the chairman of the board of a church. And 2 years before he became chairman of the board of the church, one of the pastors at that church had preached a biblically based message on homosexuality. And so the board of the team found out and said, you cannot remain and have anything to do with that church if you want to work for us. This is Australia. This is not communist China. It's supposedly free Australia. And so he resigned the same day. The head of the government there in the state of Victoria is that lunatic we talked about during the Charlie Vector time, Daniel Patrick, and he said, the guy's a bigot, he shouldn't be able to work. I want you to know where this is going. Now this goes back to July, and this is to set up two stories that I want to talk about. This is the United States Department of Justice back in July 12th, 2022. Now, what happened back in that time frame? Well, if you remember, I don't remember when the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court came down overturning Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood cases on abortion, saying that, well, the states should be able to decide. So within a few weeks, the Biden administration, through the Department of Justice, issued this statement, press release, Justice Department announces Reproductive Rights Task Force. The task force formalizes the department's ongoing work to protect reproductive freedom under federal law. Now, what's wrong with that? The Supreme Court had just decided it's an issue that belongs to the states. We have scofflaws in charge of the Department of Justice. Look at what it says here. As Attorney General Garland has said, the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision is a devastating blow to reproductive freedom. It did not ban abortion anywhere in the United States. Do you know that? It said the states get to decide. And so now they're trying to make it a big issue for the election coming up in a few weeks. The court abandoned 50 years of precedent and took away the constitutional right to abortion, preventing women all over the country from being able to make critical decisions about our bodies, our health, and our future. The Justice Department is committed to protecting access to reproductive services. It's just a big, fat lie. Now, some states are restricting abortion. That's their right under the Constitution. The task force will monitor and evaluate all state and local legislation and enforcement actions that threaten to infringe on federal legal protections relating to the provision or pursuit of reproductive care, impair women's ability to seek reproductive care in states where it is legal, impair individuals' ability to inform and counsel each other about the reproductive care that is available in other states, ban this drug based on disagreement with the FDA's expert judgment about its safety and efficacy, because, of course, the FDA is like the supreme authority on all things regarding medication. You can believe everything they say. Wink, wink. Impose criminal or civil liability on federal employees who provide reproductive health services in a manner authorized by federal law. So listen, regardless of what Congress does, if it changes the power structure, who's in charge, this is what the Department of Justice is going to do. Here's the other thing. The task force will identify such actions and coordinate appropriate federal government responses, including proactive and defensive legal action where appropriate. The task force will work with agencies across the federal government to support their work on issues relating to reproductive rights and access to reproductive health care. And so what's happened? So I told you the story, I think, last week or two about the pro-life activist who was doing sidewalk counseling outside an abortion clinic in Philadelphia. He was with his 12-year-old son. He has 7 children. A pro-abortion activist got in the kid's face, and the father pushed him away. The guy had the father charged with assault under state law, but the state dropped the charges because the guy wouldn't show up. And so time goes by, and then one morning, a couple weeks ago, this guy who has 7 children at home, 7 small children at home, I think he's Catholic, he got a knock at the door, looked out the window, and there were FBI agents with long guns, rifles, AK-47s or AR-15s, 16s, whatever, pointed at him. He opened the door. He said, "Listen, I have kids in here." He opened the door, and they pushed their way in with the guns pointed at his head, arrested him. Now, there must have been something else he did. No, it was related to this incident outside this abortion clinic. Within the last 10 days, their clinic, I believe in Buffalo, where some people protested, they sat in the hallway outside the abortion clinic. It was in an office building. And they sang and read scripture. They were charged with trespass under misdemeanors under state law. I don't know if they pled guilty or the charges were dropped. But a year and a half after that happened, 11 of them were arrested in simultaneous raids by the FBI. One of them is an 87-year-old great-grandmother. She's a real threat. If you want to go look at Tucker Carlson this week, he talked about it a couple times. And so why are they doing this? This is done to intimidate people. You'll think twice about protesting against what we think is important. And so the committee that continues to hold these hearings that said they're going to subpoena President Trump to testify. It's a lot of it is theater. Yet there were people who did things wrong. But we're in, it's almost Stalin-like world that we live in, the propaganda. It's happening everywhere. I mean, this happens in Europe. And so governments are failing all over the place. The UK, Liz Truss, they may not expect her to last another week. At the meantime, this comes from Natural News. This is kind of interesting to give you an idea about inflation, which Biden kind of admits now there is inflation, but you see how the narrative changed this week? Because if the Republicans take control of Congress and the Senate, then inflation is going to get really bad. Like, well, wait a minute. So it is bad right now. It's just going to get really bad? By the way, I don't like to interfere in people's lives, but even if you're a supporter of President Biden, would you stop taking your young daughters to meetings with him? Do you see what that guy does? Go look it up on the internet, what he did. I'm just telling you, the guy creeps me out. So I think he's third or fourth on the list. I think Newsom is fifth in the Democratic list. By the way, you know who's number 10? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Number 3 is Liz Warren. I think trying to think who Bernie Sanders is on the list. What is he, like 8,900 or something like that? So this is from Natural News to give you an idea of inflation. They called a bakery and said, so what do you pay compared to before? So here it is, bread flour prices were $12.19 in January 2021, increased to $19.97 a year later. And then in July 2022, it's now $28.88 for the same, I don't know, I'm assuming it's a sack of flour. All-purpose shortening was $41.40 in January 2021, and today it's $87.39. So you wonder why your price of bread is going up? Cake flour started at $15.13, now it's $26.28. Fresh yeast, $45, now it's $63. Granulated sugar seems to be doing okay. It was $25.69. Now it's $34.59. And then rainbow sprinkles, better cut them out. They were $56.41, and now they're $86.94 for the same quantity. I don't know what quantities they were using. It seems, though, that there's this convergence of everything. The United States is very unique in that our breadbasket of our country, through the St. Lawrence Seaway in the north and the Mississippi River system in the Midwest and South, with the Missouri River. Last year when we were out west, Pam and I drove from Yellowstone all the way over across Wyoming into the Dakota, and the whole way along Interstate 90, we're following the Yellowstone River. This thing goes for hundreds of miles. And we have this unbelievable river system in the United States that really helps us get things to market, because water transportation remains the cheapest way to get things someplace. Now, somebody will say, well, okay, natural gas. Well, you got to liquefy the natural gas. That's the expensive part of it. But the transportation part, once you get it that way, is relatively cheap. Well, it used to be. Now it's costing a lot for the fuel to run those big ships. But barges that go downriver, they have tugs and everything. But now there's a couple areas of the Mississippi River system that they can't get the barges through because the river is so low because of lack of rain. They've not seen levels like this since 1988. Do you remember 1988? I do. I mean, it was that was the year after I started playing golf, and I remember playing on fairways, and I wondered, man, I hit the ball a long way. Well, it's because I was hitting it like on a highway, and it was just rolling forever. But this is, and so one of the things they say in this, sections of the Mississippi River are approaching low water levels not seen in more than 3 decades, disrupting a vital supply lane for agriculture, oil, and building materials, and threatening businesses, including barge and towboat operators, farmers, and factories, and river cruises. Almost all of them have been canceled below certain points on the river because there's just no water. I can remember sitting there along the Ohio River at Cincinnati a couple months ago, and the river was high and the barges were flying by. The river was really running pretty quickly. The problem is that barges are grounding on sandbars in unprecedented numbers, and many ports and docks no longer have water deep enough for commercial boats to safely reach them. The chief executive of the American Commercial Barge Line said America is going to shut down if we shut down. They also say that shipping prices have doubled in the last couple of weeks because of this. As if we didn't need anything more. I was reading an article about they're trying to figure out how to make the Rhine River in Europe deeper so they can do the same thing because they've had a lack of rain there. Been a lack of rain in the UK, and reservoir levels are down, river levels are down. It's a big problem. David Goldman, who writes a Spengler at Asia Times, global margin call hits European debt markets. Folks, I do not know what to tell you about global markets, but I didn't get it edited in time. I have a clip from Ray Dalio, who used to head up the hedge fund, multi-billion-dollar hedge fund Bridgewater. He was speaking at a conference this week, the Greenwich Economic Forum. You can find it online. They had 2 days, about 11 or 12 hours. And Dalio, I mean, he's one of these, like Larry Fink, he's one of these big hedge fund managers, and people listen to what he says. And he says, we have the perfect storm in the markets. It's going to be very difficult. Now, he's not extremely nervous, but he's probably worth over $1 billion. And it's sort of like, well, if I wake up in the morning, I was worth $1 billion, and tomorrow I'm worth $500 million. Is it really going to change my lifestyle all that much? Probably not, if I'm being even modestly spending my money. But the European pound, or the British pound, came very close to completely collapsing this week. And this is happening there's going to be, I fear, a sovereign debt crisis in many, many places, and maybe even the United States. Now, interestingly enough, the strongest currencies in the world right now are the American dollar and the Russian ruble. China's in a major economic crisis. I don't know what's going to happen with China. Xi Jinping is supposed to be maybe elected emperor for life yesterday or today at a Communist Party Congress. He's had 2 5-year terms. They usually don't give you a third, and so there's some belief he's going to get a third. This third term will be essentially for life, very much like Vladimir Putin got an extra 16 years or something put on his term a few years back that would take him to about age 86. So it's a very difficult time. So trying to remember what there's protests going on in Iran. There's a major prison in Tehran that had a major fire. 4 of their prominent political prisoners were killed in the fire. Pictures of it burning, protests all over Iran. Iran is coming out, and the newspapers all say this is a Zionist and American plot to destroy our great government, and we need to all of Islam needs to unite with us. So it's almost in the terms of a holy war, and this started over the protests related to the death in custody of a young lady who'd been arrested by the morality police for not wearing her hijab or wearing it improperly. And the the people that I'm reading, a lot of people are saying this is the most serious threat to the Iranian regime since the founding of the Islamic Republic in 1979. Now, I don't know how well it will go, but it's happening. This continues to be a bit of a thing, this war in Ukraine. I talked a little bit about this last week. This was an incredibly sophisticated attack on this bridge. So you have a truck going towards Ukraine, and it explodes about at that red dot. At the same time, when it explodes, though, there is a fuel train coming the other way, or a train with fuel cars, and the explosion happens just at the right time. So the truck is moving, the train is moving. Now, I don't know if there were explosives planted there or not. That's what I think, because if you look at the damage to the bridge, I think it would have made a hole where the truck exploded as opposed to the sections of the bridge lifting up. So I think it came from underneath. But nevertheless, whoever did this knew the train schedule. They knew the composition of the train. Well, they either knew it and planned it incredibly well, or they were like the luckiest guys ever in the world to do this. It's sort of like, Dimitri, how did that blowing that truck up go? Oh, we got a train too. Couldn't believe it. The train just happened to go by. What, the other way? It was moving? So you got the grain cars. No, we got there were about 10 fuel cars, and that's where the truck blew up, and it caught on fire. So they've restored some traffic on the, so the inner lanes of the road on the right have been restored, and but the railroad tracks I don't think have been restored. The ones that were closest to the water, so if you're looking at that, the ones on the right, the railroad bridge is on the left. The train tracks on the right, they melted. They were warped and melted. Going to take a while to repair them. And I saw that Putin said, I want this repaired by next summer. Well, this is the main rail supply line into Russia, from Russia to Ukraine. So the train was going, well, whatever direction the train was going, I think the truck was going towards Ukraine. The train was going back to Russia. And you see where it's not all fuel cars. So the truck blows up right where these fuel cars are and catches them on fire. And you can see how the road collapsed in a number of sections. I just don't think it would do that if it was a thing. But Russia has retaliated now. They've launched hundreds of missile strikes, kamikaze drones, and that sort of thing. A missile blitz is how one described it. Here's one article. You can see videos like this young lady here on the left. She was talking in Kyiv about what was going on, and a missile hit the building right behind her while she was talking live on Twitter. They've hired this general. They put in this general called General Armageddon. He's been the one who's been in charge of Syria. He's a very brutal guy, and I think the goal is to do to Russia what they did to Syria. You've seen the videos. They obliterated those cities, so much so that people didn't want to live there anymore, and they left. They went to Europe and other places. That's why we had that immigration crisis. I don't know if I have enough time to talk about this. So Tucker Carlson interviewed Kanye West for a couple nights last week, and in it, he made some very strange comments. And now I've seen Candace Owens coming out defending him. You don't understand what it was he said. I can understand the English language. I think that my advice would be Christians, people claim to be Christians and pastors and stuff, you need to be very careful about associating yourself with someone like Kanye West. because it can really come back and hurt you. And I think Candace Owens is going to be, unless she changes her mind, I have a video of her saying, you just don't understand what it was he meant when he said he's going to go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. She says, well, the technical term is DEFCON 3. And so he said DEFCON 3. Well, okay, so what did he mean? I just think people need to be careful. He's been suspended from a lot of platforms. Okay, let me talk about this deal, the Mediterranean deal. So let's just review the history, because this is, I'll tell you what, this dominated the Israeli press. So along the coast of Israel, Lebanon, you can see the Israel-Lebanon border, the sort of the U-shaped peninsula there, that's in that is Haifa. And then you go up a little bit to the north and you have the city of Nahariya, and then up about that bulge, up about here. Whoops, didn't mean to change that. You have the Lebanon-Israeli border, and the border's not secure. So here is a map that was submitted back when Cyprus and Lebanon were negotiating their EEZs, the exclusive economic zone. Here's a little zoomed in portion. So you see Cyprus up here, and you see Lebanon, and then you can see these lines that were drawn. Israel accepted a line that was a little bit further, went a little bit more up, a little bit higher. But Cyprus and Lebanon entered into an agreement. They reached an accommodation. Cyprus approved the agreement, then Lebanon never approved it. So Lebanon can always say, well, that's not the agreement that we never approved that agreement. So here's a little bit more. This is a map I made up. So Israel line, that was the one that sort of was consistent with what Lebanon had said during their negotiations back around 2007 with Cyprus. Then as Israel and Lebanon got into negotiating it, and part of the negotiation was because Israel started discovering gas in their section of the Mediterranean, not in any part of the Lebanese waters, but there were some fields that were discovered back around 2010, 2011. Those were called the Leviathan field, and the known reserves there, the TCF is trillion cubic feet. So if you look at all these, Leviathan, Tannin, Tamar, and you add those up, you're going to get close to 40 trillion cubic feet of gas, which is the number I gave you a couple weeks ago when I was analyzing this. Then last year, they discovered this Karish field. Before that, they discovered this Kana field. Don't really know how much is in the Kana field that straddles the different borders. So during the negotiations over this, particularly when the Kana field was discovered, Israel had their line. Lebanon chose line 23. A United States guy come in and said, well, let's make the line here. So, and essentially he gave Lebanon about 60% of the disputed area, because everything north of this line would be Lebanon. And you see they would get more of the Kana field. So they still haven't done this, so these exclusive economic zones. Israel took the line that Lebanon had used, which was the northernmost line up here. But then Lebanon came in, and then when they discovered these other gas fields, the Karish field, Lebanon said, oh, well, wait a minute, we withdraw line 29 and we want line 23. And it's been a big football for back and forth for Hezbollah. And how these exclusive economic zones work is every country gets about 12 miles off the coast of territorial waters. So this is a map of the world with all the territorial waters that would be associated with those countries. And then you have certain rights out to 200 miles, but beyond 12 miles, it's really what they would call an exclusive economic zone. So you remember when Israel was talking about doing the East Med pipeline, Turkey took its exclusive economic zone and added it to Libya's economic zone and said, hey, if you want to put a pipeline across our exclusive economic zone, you're going to have to get our approval and pay transit fees. So this has been a big deal in the Lebanese press. Everybody was talking about it. This is the international boundary between Lebanon and Israel. Lebanon says, well, it really should be further south. Israel says this is okay, but off of the coast there are these buoys, and the buoys are there to give markers for Lebanese fishing boats, like, don't come into Israel's waters. That's the warning. Now Lebanon is like, well, that's the border, and the border only goes out for a couple miles because then the ocean gets too deep to anchor buoys. So it's a real mess. But this week they announced that there was going to be gas. Now everybody's talking about this. I'll just review this quickly. So you have about, in these gas fields, you have about Israel's gas fields, Karish, Tanin, Tamar, Leviathan. You've got about 40 trillion cubic meters of gas reserves. That's a lot of gas. And most of this has been discovered in the last really 5 or 6 years, and it's not really even commercially developed yet. And so then the question becomes, well, can Israel supply the gas that is needed by Europe? Europe needs 155 billion cubic meters. So Israel has 40 trillion. So clearly they could provide gas for a lot of years. So divide 40 trillion by 155 billion, and what do you get, 200 and something years that Israel could supply the Russian gas component of what the EU uses. So it's a significant thing. It's not anything to be messed with, but the problem is getting it there. So they're not building the pipeline. They only have this LNG ships, and there are only about 650 of those in the world. And they're booked up. Some of them, they're so booked up now, the cost to get one of these has gone up to $500,000 a day now to put your gas in it. And they expect it to hit $1 million a day soon. Now, a ship like that can carry $250 million of gas. So, if your shipping cost for 7 days is $7 million instead of $3.5 million, it's not going to break the bank for you. But there's a shortage of these things right now. And so I don't think that Israel is going to be supplying the gas that Europe needs for a couple of years. Germany says they're optimistic about what's going to happen, that they've got their reserve is 87% full. But I was reading an article from a couple weeks ago in The Guardian about a German company called BASF. BASF is this enormous chemical fertilizer producer. And they're saying that if it gets to the point, and they have this huge plant in Germany. It has 1,800 miles of piping in it. It's some huge number, and they produce all kinds of things and components that are needed for fertilizer, which start from natural gas. Ammonia comes, you have to have natural gas to do it. They say if our allocation gets down to 50%, we shut down. European fertilizer companies are now running at about 1/3 of what they were a year ago. And 9 of them have shut down completely. I think there's 23. 14 are running at about 35% of what they were doing a year ago, and 9 of them have shut down completely. And plants are shutting down all over Germany because Germany's saying, well, we're going to give stuff to homes first. This is true all across Europe. They don't have the gas to replace it that they did. I'll talk about that in a moment. So Lapid comes out. This is a great deal. We're going to do this. They had so the Israeli cabinet got together and approved it. Here is a picture of the Israeli cabinet meeting. Some voted against it. Ayelet Shaked, who kind of vacillates between being conservative and something else to be in the government, she opposed it because there's an election coming up. I think it's November 7th. I think it's a day or two before our election. There are a lot of parallels between the United States and Israel right now on many levels, as I've talked about. So this is what the meeting looked like, and they approved it. Lapid says this is a great thing. Naftali Bennett was tweeting, well, I'm going to approve it. I don't think it's that big a deal. Here's the Wall Street Journal article. And again, they have some of the things on the line. I think this came from Israel Hayom, Israel Today. I thought this was a very good depiction. Lapid likes it. He loves the sweet smell of the gas, and Netanyahu thinks the deal stinks. Both of them said the deal was historic. Lapid said it was a historic achievement. Netanyahu said it was a historic capitulation. In case you don't know, they don't really get along politically. They're at odds with each other. Lebanon minister came out. Here's the translation of this. Israel is an enemy and usurper. We're not doing a normalization. So what happened in the agreement was, it's not technically an agreement between Israel and Lebanon. It's two agreements, one between Israel and the United States, and an agreement between Lebanon and the United States. There's a further component in it. Gives rights to the people who come in to develop, any company that comes in to develop the Lebanese part of the gas fields, and that's going to be Total, a French company. That's why you see Emmanuel Macron running down to Lebanon every so often. And so this was a very good analysis. I'm not going to go through it in detail. This was at Israel National News. There's also one at JNS, Jewish News Syndicate, that talks about it. Outside of Lapid and some of the people on the left, I don't think anybody really likes this deal. It doesn't define a border between Israel and Lebanon. And it's almost like a memorandum of understanding. So legally, when you enter into a memorandum of understanding, you say, this is what we think right now, and we're going to try to enter into a contract in the future. And I would put this more in the category of memorandum of understanding than a contract. So when the EU came in to negotiate getting Israeli gas, they signed a memorandum of understanding. I do not believe that that's been turned into a contract yet, because a contract would have something like, you have to provide a certain amount of gas, each year to Europe. The memorandum of understanding says, we want Israel to provide gas to us. And Israel says, we want to provide gas to you. But that's just an understanding. It's not an enforceable contract yet. There's a legal difference between them. So a very interesting article in Jewish Press, though, starts off with this. Now, so here we are, October 2022, with a big important midterm election in the United States coming up. So the Jewish Press article that evaluates this deal starts off with a reference to negotiations that were going on in 1980 during the Carter administration and the 1980 campaign for president between Carter and Reagan. And it says, the New York Times talked about something like this in connection with the negotiations between Israel and Egypt, under which Israel agreed to give back the Sinai that it captured in the 67 war. And eventually that led to Sadat's death. So I have access to the archive of the New York Times. And it's a very interesting historical thing. It goes up through about 2002. Every New York Times published up until 2002 you can find. It's called the Times Machine. You have to subscribe to get it. And the interesting thing was, so I looked up The newspaper from October 18th, I think that's the date, October 14th or 18th, 1980. By the way, the newspaper that day, you get the newspapers now, it's this little tiny thin thing if you get one, right? The New York Times that day in 1980 was 675 pages long. They don't make them like that anymore. So anyway, so they quoted Sadat about these negotiations. He was negotiating with Menachem Begin. And it was interesting what he said. Curiously enough, Mr. Begin and Mr. Sadat have an affection for each other. Mr. Begin once told Mr. Linkowitz, he was an attorney who helped negotiate these deals, President Sadat likes to call people by their private names. I don't like to call people by their private names, so he calls me Menachem, and I call him Mr. President. President Azaz will say occasionally, poor Menachem, he has his problems, and he has told Egyptian colleagues, after all, I got back 90% of the Sinai and the Alma oil fields, and what has Menachem got? A piece of paper. So I understand his problems. So take that concept of how Sadat viewed what had happened. I got the oil fields, I got the Sinai, I got all this stuff back, and Israel, they got a piece of paper. This, and the article is a very good article at Jewish News Syndicate, and they have a picture here, and they have the full text of the agreement that you can read, and you can download it from one of the Israeli newspapers. Text of the Lebanon maritime border deal and what exactly Israel lost. And so the reason why they cited this quote from Sadat was, Lebanon gets the gas field, the Kana field. Israel might get some royalties from that, but what Israel really got was a piece of paper. And so what they did when they drew the line up, so here's what the agreement looks like. Do not circulate without authorization, so of course it's all over the place. And they talk about some of the coordinates that are going to be in the parties. See, this is why I call it more of a memorandum of understanding. The parties intend to resolve any differences concerning the interpretation and implementation of this agreement through discussion facilitated by the United States. To which a lot of Israelis will say, we have to trust the United States? They haven't been very trustworthy lately. This agreement shall enter into force from the date on which the government of the United States of America sends a notice. But it's sort of more, in my view, an agreement to agree. So when Lapid runs around saying, we got this great agreement, look at this, it's like, you got a piece of paper. You didn't really get anything for it. And the question is, did you make Israel safer? So all the Israeli heads, they cite all these people, say, oh yeah, the Mossad guy says it's better than this. But you see what they did with the line on Kana? Instead of a straight line, they kind of made a little curve in it. So that essentially all the development of the Kana field goes to Lebanon, even though it's technically, we'll accept line 23, sort of, except where it makes a difference, then we're gonna move the line. Do you see what happened? It's a terrible deal. So Abu Ali Express, who is an Arab guy who posts a lot on Telegram, you can follow his channel. He said there are 10 commandments that apply to these kind of deals. Israel's original position in the negotiations was Lebanon line number 1, and it goes on and it says Hezbollah is kind of they're going to say there's an agreement, but they're going to do what they want anyway. It's not going to make that much of a difference. David Friedman, former U.S. ambassador to Israel from 2017 to 2020, said this is in Israel Hayom. It's interesting. He has this article in Israel Hayom where he's interviewed about the deal. He also has in the Jerusalem Post magazine that came out Friday, he says, is Zionism distinct from Judaism? And he's a Zionist, and he says, no, you can't you can't distinguish one from the other. By the way, I talked about this deal in my midweek update, and I got a phone call from somebody who was pretty upset. There's no such thing as Israel, I was told. Why do you call it Israel? I said, well, it's kind of like what the people there call it. Well, they're not even Semites. I'm Palestinian. He was either Palestinian or Lebanese, and he was very upset. And I understand that, he said, I just want to ask you questions, and I gave him sort of an answer, and then I got a filibuster, so I hung up on him, and he called back, I hung up again. So anyway, so this is very passionate thing with people over there, but they hate Israel. And he ended one of his things with, all Freemasons go to hell. So I guess I'm a Freemason too. I don't even know where the meetings are. So anyway, Friedman in his interview with Israel Hayom said that, here's what he said, Hezbollah obtained another 40% for Lebanon. So in the one deal, the Hof deal, Israel was supposed to get 40% of the Kana field, Lebanon 60%. He said that 40% now goes to Hezbollah. He said, while I was ambassador, I refrained from telling the Israelis what is good for them. But he said, this is a bad deal. I don't understand the claim made by senior officials in Israel that Hezbollah lost. The experience gained in our time was that the Lebanese government would have agreed to a proposal in the spirit of mediator Fred Hoff. He talked about a 60-40 split, and the Israeli government also agreed to that at one time. But now Hezbollah and Lebanon are getting all of it. So, lots of opinions about who got the better part of the deal. The newspapers are just, I could go through and read all of these different newspapers. The Israeli government, like here's a former major general in the IDF says, we achieved a balance of terror. Achieving a balance of terror against Lebanon justifies an agreement. So we're going to do okay. Now, the interesting thing about this is, but how did Hezbollah view it? Well, here's from an Iranian newspaper, and the Hezbollah says that this was a victory without war. So they had a much different view of it. We got everything that we wanted. Lapid said this staves off a war with Hezbollah. And they'll say, look, we did this with Egypt, we did this with Jordan, and we haven't gone to war with them since we had these agreements. And so now we're going to do this with Hezbollah, and there will be peace. To which the IDF has sort of responded, and they've mobilized everything. It's interesting, the parallels between the U.S. and Israel. Back in, what's the date of this? December last year. The person in charge of energy in the Israeli government, the Lapid, the Naftali Bennett, Lapid government, Bennett being the first prime minister. Then by the time they got around to Lapid, the coalition had fallen apart, so now Lapid is a caretaker. But the person in charge in that cabinet was a left-wing lunatic. She was the energy minister, and she came out with these rules in December of 2021. Now, does this sound familiar to what the left has done in our country? And said, we're stopping all gas exploration because we want to go to renewables. And it's interesting she did that because she couldn't see less than 60 days down the road when Russia was going to invade Ukraine and the whole world gas market and oil market completely blew up. And so what you see here is the principle that the left is doing is land for peace. Now, I'm going to have a lot more to say about this in the future, but the question is this going to work? Does this fit into Bible prophecy? It may. It shows that there's the people in charge of the caretaker government, at least, think they can give up these things. We'll give up settlements, we'll stop the settlements, we'll give up land, and we'll have peace. And now we're going to give up oil. We're going to give stuff up in the ocean that's clearly ours because we want peace. Do you see the principle, the thinking that's going on here? I think it's crazy. And a lot of and Netanyahu is going crazy. General Amir Avivi, who I've interviewed and talked to quite a few times about this, one of the things he has told me since we started talking last year is that you have to look strong to your enemy. And these are our enemies. And so this is what he tweeted the other day. Those who think there is no connection between the surrender agreement with Lebanon and the deterioration in Jerusalem should think again. And this is only the beginning. The escape from Lebanon in 2000 marked the beginning of the Second Intifada. The escape and surrender in 2022 will bring the same result. It's not too late to stop the madness. And I think Amir is exactly correct. What he says is that there's been a significant deterioration in the security situation with attacks and that sort of thing in Jenin, up in Samaria, in Nablus, and even in East Jerusalem. It's a very delicate situation right now. And so I think General Avivi is exactly right that they see this concession as a massive victory, which encourages us. I saw that Hamas and Fatah may have agreed. Melanie Phillips had a great article where she essentially said the same thing. This is what we do all the time. Now, one more thing and we'll be done. So we talk about these alliances, about what happens, and this is very interesting. I talked a little bit about Astana, Kazakhstan. It is the capital of Kazakhstan. It became the capital, I believe, after the fall of the Soviet Union and Kazakhstan becoming an independent party. And Kazakhstan is a huge country. I mean, it's probably I'm going to guess it's 2/3 the size of the United States on a landmass. It's huge. It's where the Soviets had their rocket and Russia continues to have its rocket facilities, and we use it to get people in and out of space. They have this city. 2 weeks ago, I talked about this. Maybe it was 3 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And I had some pictures. They have the pyramid building, and it has this very Masonic appearance to it. And this pyramid building is the building of peace, they call it. So I'm going to play a clip from a religious thing that took place in Astana, and it's going to look very familiar. But so this week they had the CICA summit, and you see all these people here. You see Putin, you see Raisi, you see Erdogan, you see the president right there in the middle between Putin and Erdogan. You see the president of Kazakhstan. The guy to the right of Putin, your left, in the Arab dress is the Emir of Qatar, who's going to be hosting the World Cup here pretty soon. And they got together and they talked about, we're going to have peace. This is from one of the newspapers there. They had this is what we're going to do. We envision our organization as contributing to dynamic, equitable, comprehensive, and balanced economic growth, connectivity, social and cultural development. We will strengthen our collective work. Number 4, our organization will interact and cooperate in areas of interest of all member states with other states. So you have the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, which has a lot of these same countries. Now you have the CICA. Here's another picture of the main participants in Astana. And so here's the meeting that they had. This is the room that they had the meeting in. And of course, they're all sitting here, and you'll see Erdogan, he's shaking hands, and then there's Putin shaking hands. The guy there in the middle there is the president of Kazakhstan. And it just seems, it's interesting that Kazakhstan, which is in the Central Asia Muslim region, is sort of this place where everybody's talking about, we're going to do peace. We're going to all get together, cooperation. And then they had a little speech from the head of the UN even came in and said, hey, we like what's going on. And I don't have that clip in my thing, so you can just take my word for it. But look at what happened just a couple of weeks ago. This was a month ago. This is from the Catholic Network. And what you see is that, now they had the doves there in the middle, but it's the same room where they just had this political thing. And this is all taking place in Astana, Kazakhstan. And so in this meeting, they had this document on the human fraternity. The Pope was there. They had an Anglican bishop who came in and read part of the agreement. I just want you to listen to a little bit of it. I don't think I played this a couple weeks ago when I talked about this. But so, you have this human fraternity document that the Pope signed in Abu Dhabi back in 2019. They're building the Abraham family house. It was supposed to open this month, but I think it's going to be a little while. And so here comes this Anglican lady who's going to read from the document that all of these religious people, and they're from all over, you'll see some of the difference. Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions. And so the Pope came. I think there's a little clip of him being wheeled in a wheelchair. He doesn't really, there he is.
Предоставляется специальному представителю
organizations. Guided by our shared desire for a just, peaceful, secure, and prosperous world, affirming the importance of shared values in the spiritual and social development of humankind, recognizing the necessity of countering and overcoming intolerance, xenophobia, discrimination, and conflicts based on ethnic, religious, and cultural differences, respecting the richness of religious and cultural diversity, realizing that acts of charity, compassion, mercy, justice, and solidarity contribute to the rapprochement of peoples and societies, recognizing the value of education and spirituality for personal and interreligious development, affirming the importance of the role and rights of women in society, stating that material inequality leads to discontent, social tension, conflict, and crisis in
So
our
do you
world.
see what it is? This is like
Recognizing the importance
the
of
leaders of the religion
Number 7,
got together
we call
for a
upon
big
world
woke meeting
leaders
in
to abandon
Kazakhstan.
all aggressive
And they're talking about how we're going to unite all of these religions of the world. And then the Pope comes in at the end. I think this is a translation of what he's, because I think he's speaking in Spanish or Italian. But you see, there's all these different religions. There's Muslim, Jewish, traditional religions. And they're all there, and she's giving these things. Turn it back up.
And peaceful coexistence. Number 9, we advocate the active involvement of the leaders of world and traditional religions and prominent political figures in the process of conflict resolution for achieving long-term stability. Number 10, we note that pluralism and differences in religion, skin color, gender, race, and language are expressions of the wisdom of God's will in creation. Thus, any incidence of coercion to a
You see the leader
particular
of
religion
Kazakhstan
and
there?
religious doctrine is unacceptable. Number 11, we call for the support of all practical initiatives to implement.
This is more valuable than ever in challenging times like our
This is a
own,
translation
when
of
the
what the
problems
Pope
of the
said.
pandemic have been compounded by the utter folly of war. There are altogether too many cases of hatred and division, too little dialogue and effort to understand others. In our globalized world, this is all the more dangerous and scandalous. Our human family cannot advance if simultaneously united and divided.
Well, you get the point. There was also recently, there was a ceremony that took place at Mount Sinai where they had the 10 Commandments of the World Climate Group. And then when I was researching that, it referred me back to what the Pope had said about his climate statement from 2015, 7 years ago, about how the world needs to unite to fight this. And so now it's a religion, people. It's a modern end-time religion that they have here. Because it's this thing that took place at Mount Sinai. They even have their 10 Commandments. I'll have to talk about that at another time. But on the sidelines of the meeting, though, there was this kind of interesting meeting. These guys, these two guys, this is Vladimir Putin. He's waiting for someone to meet. They meet more often than some husbands and wives, I think. They're together all the time. You'll see the guy come in here in just a moment. Here he comes. There he is. Erdogan of Turkey. Now, who knows if these guys are going to be in power in a year. Erdogan, the polling is not doing very well for him in Turkey. He may lose next year's elections, if they have elections. Putin, a lot of people upset with him. But the interesting thing that he said, and I talked about this, so you got Ukraine gas shut down, you got Nord Stream pipeline unusable for now. It may or may not be able to be repaired. And so what does that do? Remember, I showed you the map. That leaves Turkey is the last place that Russian gas can transit to get to Europe. And that works to Erdogan's benefit. They've got bad inflation in Turkey, 100% or more. They have a black market of dollars, trading in dollars because the dollar is so strong. But this is what Putin said in his comments at this meeting with Erdogan. As concerns hydrocarbon energy, we deliver our hydrocarbons, including gas, in full and in compliance with your request. We use transit routes through Turkey, or whatever they call it now, Turkey, I don't know how you say that, to deliver gas to European countries. Turkey is currently the most reliable transit country for gas supplies to Europe. If Turkey and potential buyers in other countries are interested, we can consider building another gas pipeline and establishing a gas hub in Turkey for trade with third countries. So you have this alliance being cemented between Turkey and Russia. Very interesting. This is part of the end times? Could be. It certainly seems like it would be. And then you have this other alliance that's coming. I'm going to, I think, finish up with this. Is you have Russia buying all of these drones from Iran. Now they're buying missiles. And the article in Israel Hayom says cooperation between Moscow and Tehran is tightening. Military correspondents in Russia reported that last night an Iranian transport plane identified with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards landed at Vnukovo Airport in the Russian capital, apparently carrying a shipment of Arish suicide drones, which have a heavy warhead and a flight distance of up to 1,700 kilometers. And the Ukrainian government, they issued this flyer. This will help you identify if what you see, the remnants of what you see having blown up something, is an Iranian suicide drone, the Shahed 136. And this missile attacks, this has been a lot of people killed, civilian targets, power plants. A lot of Ukraine has no power. Front page of the Arab News yesterday, Iran, or maybe today, Iran faces new sanctions over suicide drone sales. And then this was in the Washington Post this morning, about 2:30 a.m. It was released. Iran plans to send missiles drones to Russia for Ukraine war. This is kind of a significant development. An intelligence assessment shared in recent days with Ukrainian and U.S. officials contend that Iran's armaments industry is preparing a first shipment of Fatah 110 and Zulfagar missiles, two well-known Iranian short-range ballistic missiles capable of striking targets at distances of 300 and 700 kilometers. Two officials briefed on the matter said, if carried out, it would be the first delivery of such missiles to Iran since the war. Look at this missile strike that Russia carried out on the famous glass bridge in Ukraine. That bridge was built to symbolize the friendship between Russia and Ukraine. This was and it doesn't look like anybody got hurt, but this was it was famous glass bridge, and it was done symbolically. And, there's all this stuff I read about, U.S. and Europe, they're funding Syrian jihadis to go to Ukraine to fight. Okay, I don't know whether it's true or not. I'm not on the ground. Putin says he's going to end his draft, but who are these guys? Well, these are Chechen militia, which is kind of an interesting thing because back when Russia had its problem with Chechnya, Russia and Chechnya and this guy's father, they were really strong enemies. In Russia, to quell the thing in Chechnya, those are all soldiers, by the way. They said that, I think you'll see there's a flag with that, the son who now leads up this militia. Russia destroyed Grozny. They leveled it. Just like they're leveling cities in Ukraine. Now, I don't know if they're going to be effective or not. I really don't know. It's interesting. Here, let me finish up with this. This is the West Bank. Violence is going up. This quote, what led to the agreement is the threat of Hezbollah, and what will force Israel to implement it is the continuation of the threat. And then this last little article here, this is Liz Truss, who's in trouble in the UK. She's thinking about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the British embassy to Jerusalem. That's interesting because here's a national security strategy of the United States just released in the last week or so. More broadly, we will continue combined diplomacy. This is about the Middle East. We will seek to extend and deepen Israel's growing ties to its neighbors and other Arab states, including through the Abraham Accords. We will also continue to promote a viable what? Two-state solution. And our ambassador gets on there and says we're going to do a two-state solution. Anyway, Melanie Phillips, one of the labor guys would be the opposition to Liz Truss, says this would be just a huge mistake. The Archbishop of Canterbury came out and said this would be a big mistake to move your embassy to Jerusalem. This is another guy, security guy, who says, this would be a huge mistake to do this. This guy is a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's interesting that King Charles supposedly has this unique relationship with Islam. Almost 30 years ago, then Prince Charles declared that he wanted to be a defender of faith rather than simply defender of the faith. Now, he's backed off on this, but I think you know where his heart is. The most senior Catholic in England has written to Liz Truss to express profound concern over proposals to move the British embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. The Archbishop of Westminster told the Prime Minister that moving the embassy from Tel Aviv would be seriously damaging to any possibility of lasting peace in the region and to the international reputation of the United Kingdom. I can see no valid reason why a move needs now to be considered. Remember, they said this about Trump. You're going to have war. Everything's going to fall apart. We're going to have world war. If you move that or the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it's just everything's going to fall apart. And what happened? Not much, except a lot of people had, hissy fits and stomped around and nothing happened. Here's one of the people who had a hissy fit. Here's what she said about what it really means to be a Democrat.
I want you all to know that among progressives, it has become clear that you cannot claim to hold progressive values, yet back Israel's apartheid government. And we will continue to push back and not accept this idea that you are progressive except for Palestine any longer.
So Rashida Tlaib, congressman from Dearborn. I believe she's one. Dearborn is Michigan is in her district. And did you see the meeting the other night with the parents? Their Muslim parents. Stop doing this to our kids. Who do you think you are? Everybody's upset. So anyway, I'll talk about the mapping project some other time. A lot of different things converging. And it's a troubling world. Economic, political, leaders come and go every week, it seems like. So be in prayer, stay in the Word, put on the whole armor of God, share the gospel with people, tell them about Jesus, tell them about the hope that you have, and stay armored up. It's a world in peril. It really is. I can't sugarcoat it. It's going to be difficult, I think. But God is faithful. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for your faithfulness. Lord, we pray that you'll just guide us, give us the strength and guidance of your Holy Spirit, keep us in the word, direct our lives, give us opportunities to share the gospel, help us to be people that stand for the truth. Because we're not the divisive ones, it's the ones who don't stand for the truth who are divisive. Help us always to remember that. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.